Great. And we'll work out like where it's recorded to and how to get that file and all that stuff afterward. But just so we have.
Yeah, I just did this yesterday. So it was in the cloud, and then you can download it to your computer.
Beautiful. Awesome. Thank you so much. Great. And are you going to be coming off of or going on camera?
I am.
Okay.
I can if you want to look at me.
No, right? We're all.
I love the hair.
Thank you. Orange. It's the best I got.
All right. So they want to make sure. Can I turn on Sheila's camera?
No, that'll have to be at, I believe the commissioner does that. I mean, whoever was just setting it up had it on for a moment. So I believe that she'll turn it on herself.
Okay.
If possible, you're going to want to mute notifications from your computer like that.
Hi, Heather. Hi, Nate.
Hi. How are you?
I am well.
Great.
I don't know why my camera's not on. I'm hiding today, I guess.
Suppose you are. All right. How are you feeling, Heather? Good? Anything else I can do for you? 5 minutes to spare.
I'm okay.
Want?
I've done these quite a few times. So.
Yeah, not worried about it. It'd be great. If you could, I don't know if I can request. Can you right click on me and make me just make me a co-host come up as an option? If you right click on me.
I can make you a presenter.
I'm trying to be able to well, I guess people are automatically let in. I think when people come in, they're automatically muted.
Yes,
and participants can't do video, I don't think, or attendees rather, which is fine. Yeah, actually, no, I think the way that you have it set up, I don't need to be.
There you go. Okay, unmute. Okay. Oh, I'm gonna.
Hi, Nathaniel.
Hi, how are you, Commissioner Poole?
I am well. How are you guys doing? Good.
Yeah,
Nathaniel, I can't tell it. Did you dye your hair orange for today?
I didn't. Yes, it faded orange just for today.
I love it.
I did like a red a couple weeks ago, and it turned into this, and I thought it was very apt.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Exactly.
How are you doing, Heather?
I'm doing well, Commissioner Poole, and yourself?
I am very busy, but good. This is going to be a great session today. I'll put myself on mute, Nathaniel, and we know how you roll with this, right? I'll wait for you to give me the green light.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
Thanks.
So Heather will probably want to wait. I mean, typically we just wait no later than like 12:02, just because most people are clicking in at 12. Some people do the call-in thing, which can take an extra minute or so to happen. So you know, once we hit like 12:02, I'll just signal to the commissioner to start.
Okay.
All right, great.
We can do that. And I'm just going to turn my camera off for a second. I got to take out my Invisalign so I don't stumble over my words.
No worries. Sounds good.
Nate, I'm going to send you a link for the video. I was told yesterday that WebEx Events does not play videos in presentation, so they can, so as we get closer to the end, you can you post it in the chat so people can view it at their leisure? It's really just a 2-minute clip that discusses Orange Shirt Day. Okay.
Hello, everyone. It is noon. We're going to start in less than 2 minutes. So thank you for being here. We're very excited about our event today and this important topic. So we will start shortly. Welcome and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our event today. To start us off, we have an introduction message from Commissioner Poole. I will pass it to her now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathaniel, and good afternoon, everyone. I am so pleased to be able to join and welcome all of you for Orange Shirt Day. So I have my orange shirt. I see Heather. Nathaniel really got into the spirit. He's got orange hair today. I think you won the prize, Nathaniel. Thanks so much. Our governor, many of us were watching her COVID briefing today. She too had orange on. So we're happy to have, happy to be together today. And I definitely want to give a special shout out to our presenter today, Heather Laform, who pretty much single-handedly manages everything to do with Native American services here and has for many years at OCFS. I know many of you have gotten to know Heather. She's done many presentations. She's represented our agency on a national level. And so we're so happy and grateful, Heather, for everything you do for us every day and for your work on today's presentation. So even though New York was home to 2 residential boarding schools, which we've read much about in the news these days, these schools that took children from their parents, from their tribal communities, and placed them in residential boarding homes, stripping them of their culture, of their language, of their heritage, in this awful attempt to acculturate them to our white culture. And so we're learning about that. And for me, that is something I had not heard a lot about. But it's an opportunity for us to come to an understanding of the harm that those schools caused to our Native American population. But we also want to learn, on a more positive note, the role of our Office of Native American Services, of the resource and skills and knowledge that Heather can bring to us as we go about expanding our diversity, equity, and inclusion work here at OCFS. So Orange Shirt Day originally began with Canadian First Nations and has since spread across North America, with the Indigenous communities raising awareness of what those students encountered when they were taken to those residential schools. And it's also a solemn day to honor the survivors and victims of those schools. I'm going to turn it over now to Heather to lead us through today's presentation. And Heather and everyone who's taken the time to join, I thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for those opening remarks, Commissioner Poole. I really appreciate it. So as we begin this presentation, as Commissioner has stated, we will be learning about the responsibilities of my office. So the Office of Native American Services was actually started in the early 1900s in 1924, and it was really created because at that time they really needed to figure out how they were going to assist the Native Americans of New York State. At this point, we were considered wards of New York State, and there was a Whipple report written in the late 1800s, and it really addressed what they called the Indian problem and what they were going to do with them. So at this point, we were forced onto reservations, which we now like to call territories. And, the person in my position, Helen Wayne, who was here when the office initiated, when it was under the Department of Social Services, she was the one that would actually go out onto the territories and assess families. And this office was historically, determined the eligibility. I have letters still in my office that talk about, families needing bloomers or new shoes or new clothes. This office did go through a few name changes. When it was the Department of Social Services, it was called the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But if you know the Bureau of Indian Affairs at the federal level, it's actually housed within the Department of the Interior, and the Department of the Interior is also known as the War Department, so you can kind of get that correlation there. So then in 1998, when they changed the name to the Office of Children and Family Services, we became the Bureau of Native American Services, because we want it to be known as providing services or assisting Native families. So a lot of my job, I think a lot of you know me as the ICWA expert, the ICWA person, the go-to ICWA expert, or subject matter expert. So that's exactly what I do. A lot of it, 50% of my work is doing the Indian Child Welfare Act. And you know, I appear in front of courts, and I work with local districts, you know, over mediation. I assist the adoption units, the ICPCs, on difficult questions. Well, legal helps me, but I assist as well. And, you know, I do provide information and consultation to both public and private agencies, educational institutes, and individuals, such as presentations like this. You know, so that we can understand the historical events that have happened to Native people so that we can serve them better today. My office also handles the tribal annuity payments. If you remember going back to elementary school and learning about the treaties, New York State has a few different treaties, and they date back, the earliest dates back to the 1700s. New York State is still obligated to uphold those. We will still request and send those out to the various nations here. I provide technical assistance, again, like I said before courts. I'm called as a qualified expert witness at times, and I do help people obtain tribal identity. We do have adoptees that have come back or reached out to my office stating, you know, I have heard that my mother was Native American from New York, you know, she came from this area, can you help me? And I definitely, you know, start digging into records, and one of my favorite parts of the job is helping people, you know, reconnect with their tribal communities. And with the new law that passed where, you know, adoption records are unsealed, it makes it a lot easier for us to reach out to the tribal nations with a name of a person so that they can actually trace that lineage. And then I also supervise the Tonawanda Indian Community House, which is located in Akron, New York. Let's see. Here we go. And this building was actually built in 1936, and it was agreed that New York State would oversee this building for 99 years. We were supposed to pay $25 a year, and the nation had said, no, we really want you to maintain it, and so that's what we do. And here are some new pictures of the building, and obviously it doesn't look like that anymore. There's a gymnasium in there, and the building actually provides drinking and bathing facilities for the residents of the Tonawanda Indian Reservation. We'll just skip back here. So New York State is home to 9 tribal nations, and if we take a look across the state here, I think most of you are located here in New York, but we do have the Tuscarora Nation, which is the Green Star, located in Niagara County. We have the Seneca Nation of Indians, which is the Yellow Star and the Red Star. It's one nation divided against 2 different territories. We have Tonawanda Band of Senecas, which is the Pink Star. And then we have the navy blue star right in the middle of the state. That's the Cayuga Nation. And next to that is Onondaga Nation. And the orange would be Oneida Nation. Way up north in Franklin County, we have St. Regis Mohawk Tribe. It's very unique the way it is situated. It's situated over 2 different countries, 2 different provinces, and 2 different counties. And then down here on Long Island, we have the Algonquin tribes, with the green tribe being Ungachug Nation, and the blue star being the Shinnecock Nation. So some of the responsibilities of at Tisch, sorry to jump around a little bit. They do provide, like I said before, they do provide a drinking water and bathing facilities. There is we do house a very small gym area for them, a workout area, I should say. There is a huge gymnasium there where a lot of the community events happened. They have Christmas events, Easter events, and just community that we do sometimes host funerals when it's a very large funeral. Not that I apologize, there's no body there, but when, like for lunches and luncheons of a funeral, they will go to the building. There is a clinic there that is funded by the New York State Department of Health, the American Indian Health Program. is there as well, and there is a small museum where you can actually, they do display items. So if you happen to go there, the OCFS staff that are there, they will actually give you a tour of the building. So you can reach out to Brenda Laform, and she can set that up for you. Yeah, so I know that when we talked about, when Commissioner Poole opened up, we talked about the residential boarding schools. And a lot of my work, I guess, is educating the field about the historical events of residential boarding schools. And as she mentioned also, is that there have been some recent, I don't want to say discoveries, I would say uncoverings, unearthing of graves. Now here are some articles that have made the headlines recently. Back in May of this year, of 2021, they uncovered 751 unmarked graves in British Columbia at a school called Camp Loops Indian Residential School. And then after that, we've seen a lot more come to light, right? There was even, so there was 215, my apologies, 215 in Kamloops, and then they found another one, 751 unmarked graves, and then we just keep finding more. And, you know, I think recently, I know everybody's Facebook feed looks a little different. Mine has lit up in orange today and just different articles, and I believe the number we are at is over 6,000, and that is just, there's a couple schools in the U.S. they have data on, but the majority of that number comes from the schools in Canada. And then in June of this year, Interior Secretary Deb Haaland actually announced that she was going to start investigations into the boarding schools that were set up here in the U.S. So I don't want to say I'm excited, but I'm interested to see what the investigations will lead us to. So the history of the boarding schools really started in the early 1800s with the Civilization Fund Act, and this really pretty much says is like, you know, if, you know, we will pay you to actually assimilate these children. So, and how do you do that? You do that through instruction and employ, if you look here in the image, you employ capable persons of good moral character and instruct them in the mode of agriculture. And so really this was the start. This was the beginning of the civilization process. Now, I also want to make note here that there were, at the same time this was going on, there were other I would say Indian policies that went on. There were, I apologize, I can't remember the exact dates, but they had banned Native American religion or ceremonies, so we weren't allowed to practice our ceremonies until actually 1978. We were banned, men were banned from growing long hair. They had to cut their hair in order to receive the rations that feed their family. So on top of just the boarding school, there were other Indian policies that affected these communities and their families. So even though it started in 1819, right, that fund, this image here is of the Thomas Indian School. And again, the purpose was assimilation and civilization of Indian children. So the Thomas Indian School actually started in 1850 to 1855, and it's actually run by missionaries first. And then the BIA came in and started their residential school program, and so it really started around 1860s where the BIA got involved. So by the 1800 or by 1880, the U.S. operated actually 60 schools for 6,200 Indian students. I was doing some more research on that number, and it was actually by 1926 that 83% of Indian school-aged children were in a boarding school. So we think about that, 1926, not that long ago, it was less than 100 years ago, that the majority of our children, our Native children, were in boarding schools, such as the Thomas Indian School. Now, obviously, this picture looks, it's a very nice building. Grounds are very well kept. I love looking at architecture in old buildings, but there are some people that live on the territory that can't go into this building because of what has happened to them. As I said before, the Thomas Indian School started in 1855. The Thomas Indian School is actually right in the middle of a reservation territory. And a lot of their children, like I said, were sent to this school. It was really the person in my position 100 years ago, her name was Helen Wayne, who actually made referrals to the Thomas Indian School. Remember, she went in and she assessed families, right? And she kind of made that decision where, you know what, I don't know if you have the space to keep your children here. I don't know if you have the money to keep your children here. And a lot of reasoning as to why the children were sent to the boarding schools was very stuff that we wouldn't send children to schools or into foster care for now. Poverty doesn't mean that Native families didn't love their children or couldn't take care of them. There was also a school very close to New York, and it's called the Carlisle Indian School, and it's another very famous boarding school. And you know, they just recently on the news, or I've seen in my Facebook timeline, I want to say it was over the summer, they actually made a pilgrimage to the Carlisle Indian School to obtain 10 of their children and take them, and what I want to say was the Sioux tribe, went there and took their children so that they could repatriate their remains back to their home territory. So what really happened at these schools? You know, this image, I think, speaks volumes to what this event, or I don't want to say, you know, when children were removed. If you look closely here, you will see that there are teepees and family members, and this in the background is a residential school because their children were forcibly taken away. There wasn't any agreement. You didn't go in and get to agree with the family as to whether or not they wanted to. Stories that I've heard from my elders where, you know, they could hear the Mounties coming down the road and they would run and hide because they knew that they would be taken, and they were taken with force. And they told their family that, you know, you can come get them when they're 16. And it was very rare was their visitation between families and their children. And this is a family or family members waiting outside of the residential schools to get a glimpse of their child. Now, I think most of us maybe are parents on this presentation, and every day, and I think it even hit me a little bit harder today when I dropped off my 4-year-old at school, because my grandmother was about 3 or 4 when she was taken away from her father. And at that time in the 1930s, they didn't believe that a man could raise a female child, right? It just wasn't thought of, it wasn't the way. So my grandmother was sent away to live in a residential boarding school till the time she was about 16 years old. So, you know, while she was there, what they tell us, if you have seen the documentary of Unseen Tears, if you haven't seen it yet, I recommend that you see it because it does go through, you know, a survivor's account of what actually happened to them. I mean, I'm not an expert, but I will share my grandmother's story and share my family's story so that, you know, people can understand. The loss of identity. I mean, we take a look at these pictures and we see, you know, I don't know where these Native children come from, but to me, just by the clothing and the hair, they look like they can be Navajo or Apache. But you look like on the second picture, there's no identification. Like you can't even tell where they come from. And a lot of how we dressed is how you determined what tribe or nation you came from. you know, just within the Haudenosaunee Iroquois Confederacy itself, you know that we wear different feather hats, and that's how we determine which family, which nation, which clan we belong to. The loss of language, that is a big thing today, where a lot of our people, including myself, don't speak the traditional language. A lot of our ceremonies are held in the language. You know, I do go to Longhouse. I do sit through our ceremonies. Unfortunately, I don't know what they're saying. And when my grandmother went to the boarding school, she was a fluent speaker, as a fluent speaker could be at the age of 3, and she, you know, she was punished. She was locked in a laundry room or a closet every time she spoke her language. And so she, and as she explains in Unseen Tears, that she does not speak her language for 2 years because she was stubborn. And she said, well, if I can't speak my language, then, you know, then I'm not going to speak. And if I have to speak English, then that goes against everything that she believed in. Imagine thinking that at a 3, 4-year-old. Maybe she was a little older, but that was what, you know, how her train of thought was. And so with her loss of language, you know, she wasn't able to teach her children. They didn't have language immersion schools on the territories at that time. So her children weren't able to pass on that language. I am not able to pass on that language to my children unless I have been, you know, fortunate enough to send them to an immersion school. And unfortunately, in the area that I live in, that is not possible. And culture. So, you know, the culture of being, I don't want to say it's being Native American, but our culture is our life, our religion. Our religion is our culture, if that makes sense, right? Our ceremonies are I want to say, are a little bit different than church, right? It's really giving thanks to the Creator and, you know, thanking them for everything that we have. You know, we thank them for the trees, and we know that the trees give us oxygen and air to breathe. Obviously, we weren't scientists before contact, but we knew the trees were important. And then, you know, we give thanks for strawberries. We know that strawberries are, you know, we consider them to be our medicine. Obviously, now that we know that they're full of vitamin C and great vitamins, but back then they were, you know, they were considered our medicine and helped, you know, heal. As I said before, the abuse that happened in these residential schools, you know, hair cutting. Hair to us is sacred. You know, you only let your family and your loved ones touch your hair. It's thought to be that our hair is an extension of our dreams and our thoughts. And really, the only time we cut our hair is when we're grieving. So they, you know, they did cut my grandmother's hair. She said that they were pretty much bald by the time they were done cutting her hair. It's, you know, it was, when I think of that, what I just said is they were mourning, it kind of makes sense, right? You cut your hair, and these children, these poor children were mourning and sad from being away from their families. I can't imagine having my 4-year-old be away from me for any amount of time. Yeah, you might get a little annoying, but but at 4 years old, you know, your parents are your life, or your world, or your safety net, and you're thrown into these schools, and you know, and you're at the mercy of these strangers. So, do we have any questions from the audience, Nate, at this time?
No questions from the audience yet. Everyone, just so you know, there's a chat, and there's also a Q&A option. So feel free to drop questions in there. I'm here for those. But feel free to keep going.
All right, great, thanks. So because of all of the actions, especially the residential schools, and with the residential schools being, I guess, in cooperation with different, with different, I want to say different churches, right? Presbyterians, Catholics, Christians, they, you know, a lot of the schools actually had these different religions affiliated with them. So, you know, a lot of these children were forced to go to school, were forced to pray. So it's not hard to see that, you know, there is some hard feelings from the Native community towards the Catholic Church, you know, because of what they did to their children. Now, Orange Shirt Day started in 2013 due to Phyllis, I want to say Weber, and I apologize, you can't see the video. And it started because of her story. And her story is that when she was a little girl and her grandmother had she was so excited to go to this boarding school, and, you know, thinking that it was going to be somewhere where she can learn and live and have friends, that her grandmother made her this really nice orange shirt, this beautiful orange shirt, probably the most beautiful shirt she's ever seen. And once she got to the school, they took it off of her. They made her change into the uniform, and she never saw that shirt again. And, you know, and I'm not too, you know, and whatever else she had experienced in that school is you know, kind of horrendous, right? Of what has happened to these children. Now, I'm not saying that all of the residents at the schools were abused, but a majority of them are. You know, in Unseen Tears, my grandmother discloses she was sexually abused by someone who, you know, worked at the school. So we, you know, as a little girl and being so far away from her home, how did we let that happen? How can a parent, and there's nothing that her father could have done to protect her. I have learned since starting this position and learning more about my history and the policies surrounding Indian policies, that, you know, more of my family, I'm learning that more of my family has attended residential schools. So not just recently, I learned that my grandmother's father went to boarding school, and his father went to boarding school. So obviously it's a generational thing. And that's just on my mother's side. And then for my father's side, I learned that my father's mother went to a boarding school as well, but I'm not too sure as to how many of her siblings or of her parents went. But I am learning every day something new. And the reason why we have Orange Shirt Day on September 30th is because this is around the time that they took the children to the boarding schools. So what can you do to support Orange Shirt Day? So obviously we can wear an orange shirt. I want to thank everyone today who wore an orange shirt. You don't know how much it means to me that you are, you know, supporting this event. As I said, you know, my grandmother was a survivor. You know, if she wasn't here, if she didn't make it through, I definitely wouldn't have been here. You can watch a virtual event online, such as you did today with me. And you can share Phyllis Websted's Orange Shirt Day presentation. The video here is a very small clip. It's about 2 minutes, and how she explains it, which she does it way better than I did. And then there's the story as well, which tells about, you know, what happened as well to her. And Nate, I think we have a question in here.
Yes. So we have a question in the chat from Melanie asking if the schools kept records of the children.
They did, and it's funny that you say that, because I was just last night I was actually reading a report that goes back to, I want to say, the early 1900s, and they did keep records. The records were actually approved by the Senate. So yeah, and you know, in the reports that I read, they didn't call the children that attended attended the school, children or students, they call them inmates. So I found that extremely disheartening, because if you think about it, these children were inmates, right? They weren't allowed to go home. Their families would have to have written permission to come see them. And they definitely were treated, right, like inmates. You know, you have your routine, you have your education, but a lot of the children that also went to the schools were forced into labor as well, right? They did, you know, if it was an industrial school, they made products. If it was a farming school, agricultural school, like they produced and they farmed and they, you know, produced food either for the community and surrounding communities, for the school itself. Recently, I learned that at the Thomas Indian School, they would, I don't want to say rent out the female students, but they did, you know, excuse them from school for the summer to go live with a family to become a live-in maid. And this was closer, you know, and these were houses or estates that were closer to the Thomas Indian School. And, you know, they would live there with the family for a certain amount of time, and then they would go back to the school. And, you know, there just wasn't a lot of privileges, is the language that they use in the documentation, of children being able to go home. In one of the stories, Geronimo Henry, he was dropped off at the age of 5, and his mother never came and saw him. Now, we don't know why, but there have been some documentations where, you know, the schools say it's a privilege, and either if the student didn't behave, they lost that privilege and never got to see their family. I mean, we just think about the developmental age of these children, from 4 to 10, and how much, you know, they need us, and we're their world, and we provide for them. That I really still have a hard time wrapping my head around that, how we can just take these children and place them into boarding schools.
It sounds like, I mean, what you're describing, even though we know the transgression was taking them originally and putting them in these boarding schools, but you just described slavery, you just described sex trafficking, labor trafficking, many of the things that you know, we as an organization are in charge of policing and preventing. And so it is, I think it's really important for context. And I actually have a question, if you don't mind. I know that I think it's easy for people who are not from the community to at least see and know. I would imagine all of us on this presentation right now can acknowledge just how awful this must have been for the children, and it sounds like it from your own grandma's experience. But I'm also wondering, you know, we're having so many big conversations in our country right now about past transgressions against races of people. And I think we're asking ourselves, how is that still being felt today? So could you try to just give me sort of an idea of, theoretically, if this had never happened, what's the loss, you know, today because it did happen? Like, if it hadn't happened, what would you have gained as a community, or perhaps maintained? And because it did happen, you know, even still today, what's the loss?
Right. I mean, if this didn't happen, right, we wouldn't have lost all of those children, right? We're up to 6,000 now. Can you just imagine the Native American population today? We wouldn't be 2%. We would probably maybe be more like 10%. And the language and the culture and the traditions would definitely have flourished. We, you know, just, you know, with my grandmother losing her language and then her family, she, you know, that's about 75 people who didn't learn their language. And so that's just from my grandmother alone. So we take 6,500 students, and that if they had their language, how many other children and descendants would be able to fluently speak their language today? Today we have endangered languages because there's just not enough people to keep them thriving. you know, I believe a couple years ago, the Onondaga Nation, which I'm from, had about 50 fluent speakers left. So, you know, we need to, when I say we, society, the government, the federal government really need to, you know, invest in these families, because it's also a way of helping them heal these past transgressions, right? They are the families that we deal with today, right? When we open this onion, right, is what I like to say. It's not until then that we get to see why they are so distrustful with the government, why they don't want CPS coming into their homes, why they don't want them on the territory, why the chiefs are like, what are you doing here, right? It's because their thought, all they know is that CPS, child welfare, DSS has come taking their children and they've never seen them again, right? Or they didn't get to see them for 25 years, or they never came home and nobody could tell them why. So, you know, the families that we deal with today are definitely feeling, if I'm sitting here in front of you and my grandmother went to a residential boarding school, it's not that far removed that you're working with somebody whose grandmother or mother went to the boarding school as well.
And so I just want to lift up that Jean Kramer lifted up in the chat, the concept of intergenerational trauma. So if you, and I see you nodding, so can you just give us sort of an idea of what does that phrase mean, and then in this context, how is it relevant?
Intergenerational trauma. So, right, just 3 generations, right? My grandmother, her father, and her grandfather all went to a boarding school, right? So the trauma that was imposed on the great-grandfather, and we have learned that we know that trauma is ingrained in our DNA after that, right? So the trauma that he experienced then went to his child. So that's compounded, right? And then the trauma that this child, and he's now carrying the trauma of his father, is now onto my grandmother. So my grandmother is carrying 3 generations of trauma within her. And how do you not, and if you haven't learned how to parent and you haven't learned coping mechanism, how do you parent well? How do you parent efficiently, right? All you know is what you learned in the boarding schools. I can tell you my grandmother taught everyone in her family, even I remember learning as well, how to make a bed military style, right? And that's, you know, her children had routine. You know, they cleaned the house from top to bottom every weekend. My grandmother was very strict. Was she very loving? Not at all. Right? I can remember a few times where I received a hug from her, or she said she was proud of me, or that she praised me. How that translated into my mother's parenting, again, very little affection, right? It's because she didn't know. She learned from what she learned, you know. And here I am. I work in this field. And I'm not a perfect parent, but I am definitely trying harder to show that my sons are loved and accepted for who they are.
Yeah, thank you for letting me, I always like to pretend like I'm a newscaster sometimes on these and ask some follow-up questions, and thank you for doing that. I want to lift up that Carol Jordan just wrote to the panelists, but it's a great statement. She writes, what I find eye-opening is that there are so many families who you meet today in 2021 that are still experiencing the painful trauma that happened to our siblings, parents, or grandparents. It has a tremendous effect on all of us. Our ability to love and cherish our children as children has been stolen and lost. The ripple effect has not yet subsided. Mm-hmm. And something that I just feel is important to bring up is that this connection to generational trauma, not to distract from this day, but just to expand. I was blown away. Someone brought up to me that Ruby Bridges is in her 60s, the woman who desegregated the first school. So we have the Black girl who desegregated the first school, still very much alive and in her middle ages. What's that trauma like? So this generational trauma. I guess one more question that comes to mind is, how hard has it been for you to reach back and get get your arms around that culture because your family was so separated, it's so intentionally separated from it? Like, has it been more effort for you to try and get to know that side of your own life, your own DNA?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's, you know, my grandmother moved to Buffalo after she was released from the boarding school. I'm just going to give you a little story here. So she was released, and she was released to her sister, and her sister was like, I can't take care of you, right? She was much older than her. She was starting her family. She's like, you're going to go live with a cousin in Buffalo. So, you know, this is what, the 40s, maybe early 50s. There wasn't cell phones, there wasn't texting. So my grandmother gets to Buffalo, and she finds that the cousin moved, right? She doesn't know where the cousin moved to. So she's like, what do I do? Where do I go? So she went to an all-night diner. She sat there, who knows, drinking how many cups of coffee. And the next day she went to the employment office, and she started a job as a live-in maid. So, you know, as she got older, I know she went back to the territory up in Canada, and she, you know, she didn't have any land. So she was really between the two, but mostly she made her life in Buffalo. So when you're, you know, from what I see today, those that live on the territory are so much more fortunate because they get to experience, if they choose to, right? Because you don't have to. Choose to be so close to the longhouse and the ceremonies and the chiefs. And for those of us that, you know, have lived off territory all of our lives, it is a struggle. It is an effort to go back and try to fit in. And, you know, I can tell you it was very intimidating at first to go back and like, hey, like, I am one of you, you know, I may not be living here, but you know, I want to learn. And, you know, sometimes it's not, you know, it's just because I'm Native doesn't mean I'm automatically welcome. They kind of, you know, you kind of do get looked at because you don't live on the territory. And this is just my own personal experience and opinions on this. You know, I am so fortunate that, you know, I have a cousin who accepted me with open arms and, you know, is, you know, teaching me every day. And I, you know, I'm so grateful to her, and because she knows that I don't understand, and she will tell me, you know, what they're saying or what the dance means. So.
Another question just came in, and I'm sure inspired by the story of your grandmother, but how many children find their families after they're released from these schools? So when these children are released, you know, how many of them actually were even able to do that?
There is no data on that I can find. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I would guess 50-50 were able to go back and find their families. Maybe, you know, but then we have to remember there were families that were waiting for children that never came home. And that's a lot of the reason, you know, we're wearing orange today, is to remember and honor those children that never made it home, whether, you know, they died at the school. And, you know, reading through my Facebook feed, because it's, like I said, it's lit up in orange today, that, you know, and I just totally completely lost my train of thought, but it's, you know, we're honoring those victims that died at the school. And, you know, a lot of children didn't have to go to school with graves on them or cemeteries attached to them. And it's unfortunate that, you know, 3 generations of my family did.
Yeah, it makes me think about the families that waited and that the children did die. And so there's those families, and then families that waited, but the children, like your grandma, were so separated, so severed from that connection that they may not have gone back. It also, your grandma's particular story makes me think about the way we hear about how unfortunate it is when inmates just are sort of released and there's no attempt to connect them to a permanent resource or services. They're just left to figure it out on their own. And that's kind of what I'm imagining your grandma doing in Buffalo, sitting in a diner.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely happens, and especially if you think about the tribal communities, right, and how rural they are, and maybe they have minimal resources. I want to make a shout out to Janelle up in St. Regis, and she started this great program where, you know, inmates are being released back into the community, and she's giving them resources and small houses to, you know, to live in after they come back. And it's just that one little step that's going to give them that support so that they can be, you know, come back to society successful or to their community successful. So there are so many different intersectionalities between our work and what happened at the residential schools. And, you know, this presentation, which I've been so, you know, anxious, but I'm so grateful to be able to present it and discuss, like, you know, when you know, and this, you know, I know particularly in child welfare, you know, we can see the effects, but when we're working with inmates, Native inmates, we didn't see that. You know, we don't see that. We don't research that. And, you know, there are definitely things that we need to look more into.
Thank you. Yeah, the other thing that's coming to mind, and I remember taking the training, I actually think it was when I first met you, taking the training on race equity work over with PDP, and something that I remember thinking at that time is how unfortunate it is that there's a history to the work that we continue to do today that is rooted in something so bad. You know, there's a lot of other words I want to use, but I'll just say bad. You know, that you know, we carry, no one gets into child welfare work to do bad things to children. Obviously, it is to support and help. And yet the system we work in, there's a history that is just really ugly. So I think my last question, I guess, would be, you know, to the point of this slide about supporting Orange Shirt Day, what are other things, just as we do our work with the children of the state of New York, that maybe we should think about, especially in relationship to how, you know, the beginnings of child welfare work were not always the altruistic goals that we have today?
You know, when I train other groups and I'm training caseworkers, and, you know, it's what you need to know about, you know, is just understanding the family story, right? Like, it's always a big thing is, you know, I think we you know, as a society, as myself, like when I hear CPS, I'm like, oh no, something's wrong, something bad's happening, right? And you get, and as a family, you get nervous. As a caseworker, I think we just come to think like, oh, you know, now I gotta go deal with this family's problems, but we really don't understand what this family is going through, and we really have to listen to what they're saying or what they're telling us, and understanding their story, and understanding that what they went through has led them to where they are today. And this can be, it doesn't just have to be Native Americans. It could be, you know, the refugees that we're seeing, or just anybody from any community, is really understanding their story. Everybody has a story, right? And everybody has life experiences that led them to where they are today. And it's really, as a caseworker, I think we need to take 5 minutes just to understand their story and where they're coming from. I hope that answers your question.
No, it definitely does. Thank you. You know, adding that layer in, you know, going in and thinking this child's great grandmother may have been in a foster boarding home and an Indian boarding school, you know, and been severed from their culture. And then the culture that this child has is sort of manufactured. You know, it's been given to the family as opposed to part of the family's history. And how does that affect them? There is one other question that jumped into the chat, kind of a 21st century potential solution. Melanie's wondering if, like, Ancestry.com, DNA, and 23andMe, stuff like that, has ever been used to help to find families or connect people?
So I have a story for that. So back in 2018, I actually had a woman reach out to me on Ancestry.com because, of course, you know, I was following the trend. I did a DNA test, and I was just like, let me see how much Native American I am. So, of course, they come back and they say, you know, I'm 51% Native American, which I think is a lie because, you know, all four of my grandparents are Native American. But anyways, this woman, she reaches out to me and she's like, yeah, she's like, it sounds like we're first cousins. And, you know, she's like, I was adopted and she was adopted in Utah. And I was like, well, you know, can you tell me a little more? Like, what do you know about your birth mother? And she's like, well, I only know like she's one of 12. And, you know, I was like, well, that sounds like my grandma Margaret's family, my father's family. And so, you know, come to find out, my aunt had adopted this child out, never told anybody that she did. And, you know, this woman, I believe she's in her late 40s now, finally was like, you know, like she knew she was adopted and she just kind of wanted to know where she came from. She never knew, she never had the inkling that she was Native American. And now, you know, she come to find out she's half Cayuga. And she actually made a trek up here in 2019 to meet her biological family. She got to meet, you know, Cayuga Nation members, meet with the administration, because she's also due an annuity. So, you know, Ancestry.com does happen, and that's my story for you on that. And, you know, we became Facebook friends, and I get to, you know that I have family that lives in Utah that I can go visit. But it's really, really was exciting, and I'm so happy that she got to find her family.
That's awesome. That is so wonderful. Thank you so much. I've got a note to please tell you thank you so much for sharing. And, you know, I'll say, you know, if you have any final thoughts you want to add, please feel free. But I do want to just say on behalf of OCFS and thank you so much in the DEI office. So we so appreciate you presenting on this very, very, very important topic. I will say as a very Anglo-Saxon white person raised in America, the way that I grew up understanding Native American history and experience was wrong, and I need to constantly be learning more and educating myself about these people who not only live among us but lived here first. And so thank you so much for sharing so much about this. Really appreciate it. Getting lots of thanks in the chat saying very interesting, informative, important work. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
No, thank you for everyone who attended and listening to me. And you know, life is, you know, you're always learning. Life is a learning journey throughout your entire life. I like I said before, I am no expert, but I will share with you what I know. And you know, and that's what I hope you take back, is that you will continue learning about Native American history, and not what's censored, right? So there are lots of resources out there, documentaries that you can definitely, we have a list here. If you want to reach out to Lisa Burgess, we will definitely forward that to you. But thank you again for listening to my story and allowing me to share.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Yep.
Oh, can you pronounce that?
Sure. It says Nyawe, which means thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you.